Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Glorious Freedom. This is our third and final episode on Glorious Freedom, and as you may recall, I was thinking about this over our July 4th Independence Day celebration of freedom here in the United States for those of us that live in this place. And the narrative, well, as I'm processing things, constantly have things from the narrative that pop in my head. This is why I'm so into the biblical narrative, is that I found an infinite number of applications to just about everything that happens in life. And since this is the narrative about how we all got here and our nature and our source, shouldn't be too surprising that is a story that always has something to do with what's going on. If we will look deeply enough into the story, we'll find that it really is a narrative of great wisdom. And the first thing I thought about was Romans chapter 8 and verse 21 specifically, where Paul is talking about world-changing events. The writer of Hebrews says, this was actually earth-shaking events. Once more, I will shake the heavens and the earth, a new creation. Well, what's happening in the new creation? What's going on? Well, the current creation is groaning. This is part of the change process. This is part of what happens when you're experiencing something new. And what's going to occur is that the creation itself is going to be delivered from bondage. This is why we move forward in life. There's something that we feel like is restraining us, constraining us, holding us back. We've outgrown something. We've outgrown a relationship or an idea or a group or an ideology. And we feel then the restraint of that as a type of bondage, some bondage far more severe than others. And the deliverance of this creation was nothing less than deliverance into glorious freedom of the children of God. So freedom is associated with the entirety of God's creation. The entire creation itself, not some of it. Genesis 1:1 and the creation there is not about God created some of the heavens and God created some of the earth, but there's some of those solar systems and galaxies and planets and parts of this planet Earth God did not create. Now, God is the creator. There is no other creative power or source than God as source. The same is true for the coming of the new heaven and earth. It is all-encompassing. The new heaven and earth is all-inclusive. How could God bring about a new creation and there be creatures in the new creation that are not of His creating power and source? I say this because, again, we have stressed over and over again that the interpretation of the narrative is bringing about a world-changing movement. We're talking at Presence with people all over the globe who are ready for a movement into a glorious freedom wherein their God identity is assured, where they are not put in a position of trying to be a human judge of other people and whether or not they can bestow upon them God identity, which religion does, setting up their own authoritarian groups and then assigning and telling people whether they're in or out in that sense. But what comes with this? I mean, we've been talking about the fact that there are things that we are all experiencing as we move forward in this message. So I want to talk about some things. I want to talk about frustration. I want to talk about isolation. I want to talk about heartache of lost relationship. And I want to talk about the pain of not knowing. One of the things that, again, I thought about when I began to prepare for this was, first and foremost, what did Jesus go through? Because he was the firstborn one of this new creation that came as a result of the old creation being delivered. And so I'm thinking about Jesus. And then I'm also thinking about his followers. Every one of us is doing our best to follow the guidance that we see in the teachings of this biblical narrative, the teachings that come from God as source. So they were too, but the birthing of something new came with a tremendous amount of confusion and frustration. Have you ever looked at something that you thought was so obvious about what the narrative was trying to say and wondered, how in the world is it that this person or this group just can't see it? They just can't see it. Well, when I went back and thought about the setting of what was going on, I thought about the cross event and the fact that of all the followers that were behind Jesus, with Jesus, amazed at the miracles, eating the food that came from the miracles, enjoying the fellowship and the inclusion that came from that fellowship, of all of those followers, by the time you get to the cross, you have Mary, the mother of Jesus, you have Mary's sister, you have Mary Magdalene, and you also have Mary, wife of Clopas. Apparently, Mary was a pretty popular name. You have them, you have those women, and then the only disciple that was there at the cross event was John. So, how did they feel? Did they feel like, wow, this is really something, the way this new creation is coming into being? Everything that Jesus taught is now being rewarded. People are seeing it. People are rejoicing in this new message. People are so happy and excited about this God identity that Jesus is pointing to. Everyone is so excited that the kingdom is not some literal piece of land or a Davidic throne or something that depends on someone's keeping the law. Oh my goodness, isn't it wonderful that the kingdom is actually understanding and coming to an awakening that God dwells in the heart, meaning God's the source of identity. But no, I got no idea how they must have felt as they were there at the cross, but they had to be experiencing a tremendous amount of confusion about what was going on and why the religious teachers didn't see it and why the other disciples weren't seeing it, and they themselves wondering, can we ever see it? Can we ever understand it? And as I looked at this, again, all I'm saying is that I realized that one of the earth-shaking, world-changing situations, feelings, emotions, was an emotion of great confusion, if not frustration. Again, frustration is not uncommon when you wonder why nothing is happening for something that appears to be so powerful and such a great step forward, the universal love of God. But that is part of the process. And then the other thing I thought about, as far as the people at the foot of the cross, if you had said to them, guess what? This story and each of you are going to be remembered for all time. there are going to be people talking about you by name, you specifically by name, 2,000 years from now. I think they would have not believed in 1 minute that they would have been going down in history or that their life would hold any significant meaning. They weren't there because they were trying to gain fame, be known, be exalted, establish a great reputation. They were there because they were committed to following Jesus on every single level, all the way down to being with him in that event. And so that was the furthest thing for their mind. But guess what? When you think that your life is not making a difference, and when you can't imagine that anything you're doing in your life today or that you will do in the future is having enough impact, making a big enough change, helping the world-changing event that we speak of in all these podcasts to happen, we need to remember that the power is working not from the self or ourselves. That power is working through the least obvious situation, the least powerful person. Why? Because that is the way the narrative points us to where the power actually is and the source of that power. So I take courage in that, and I have no idea I'll go down in history. That's not why I do what I do, no more than they did what they do. I'm passionate about this message of universal God identity. That's why I do this. And I know the pain and the suffering that came with that first creation when you're in bondage to a system of judgment, and when you don't have freedom, and when you do feel constrained. And I know how many of you have talked to me directly and told me how euphoric you have felt as you've discovered this thing and then that thing, and the freedom that you feel now compared to where you've been in the past. And as I thought about principles surrounding Jesus himself, one of the passages that for years has jumped off the page to me is Matthew 26:56. Jesus had been taken. He had not resisted. Everyone standing there saw that the soldiers were about to take him away, and they knew why. And so Matthew simply writes this sentence: "Then all the disciples forsook him and fled." All the disciples forsook him and fled. Jesus was left alone. That's isolation. Jesus was left in complete isolation. There wasn't someone standing beside him, anyone to talk with, anyone to encourage, anyone to say, yeah, we can get through this. He experienced isolation to the greatest degree possible. And this is after all those days where Jesus had healed people. He had provided the loaves and the fishes for the multitudes. He had sat at the table with all these people who had been marginalized by religion. He sat at the table with all these people that religious people said don't belong in the kingdom, can't be at all a part of this God identity that we all share. But they weren't there, and neither were his disciples. They all fled. So, isolation, that is one of the most common emotions that people have talked with me about. And believe me, when I started on this journey, when my dad started on this journey, when our family started on this journey, we all have experienced isolation. It comes with the turf. It is a part of the cost of glorious freedom. There is not a universal God identity presence like community on every corner as you drive down the street. There are lots of different church buildings, lots of buildings made with hands. They're everywhere. And those buildings made with hands, why, they'll never go away. Nothing's going to change. I've been following a message that's beyond buildings made with hands, and I just don't see a lot of change. When Peter wrote, all the way out in the 60s, some 30-plus years after the cross event, he said, I know that most of you are asking, where is the promise of his coming? Because all things are continuing as they have since the days of our fathers. Nothing's changed, is what you're saying. I know what you're thinking, says Peter. You don't see enough change. You don't see anything happening. What's going on? And when you read the whole book of Hebrews, you got the same thing going on. You have a writer who's encouraging them, don't turn back, don't go back. Because that is a natural inclination and instinct, is to think, I would be better off, somehow or another we forget why we move forward in the first place. And so all of a sudden there comes that day of, I really miss this and I miss that about the thing you left. And I'm not saying that those are not legitimate and that there aren't those things, but there's also an element that comes in the narrative where the narrative says, you can even get to a place where you sit around the campfire and say, you know what, it'd be better off if we went back to Egypt. It'd be better off if we were back there in bondage. It'd be better than this, what we're experiencing now, because people don't like to experience the frustration, the confusion, the isolation. It takes courage. Jesus was a warrior. He was the greatest warrior that ever walked the planet. And for him, he said that being a great warrior was to face these things for the joy that you're going to experience on the other end, and that joy is always centered in glorious freedom. But what other things were there? I think from the disciples' standpoint, they probably felt most likely hopelessness, all the things that they had anticipated that they didn't really understand. They understood kind of what was going on, but really the revelation of Spirit that came to them after the departure of Jesus, just as Jesus had promised it would, really was a continual enlightenment about what the impact of this change was really all about. They were seeing it and understanding it bit by bit. But make no mistake, they had to feel this hopelessness. Their leader had been taken away and crucified. What a shameful end, and that was it. All the things they had hoped for just didn't happen. And so there's also, along with these other emotions, this feeling of hopelessness. And that's when I look through my ego and myself as source, and I look out at the world. It's that thing of, as I look out at the world today, things are this and things are that. And I'm telling you, I'm telling you, everything's going to be ruined. My country's going to go down. My nation's going to go down. Societies are going to collapse. This, and this is going to happen. Yeah. If I look through my ego, I can come up with a lot of great negative, destructive type scenarios. And that'll be my narrative if I so choose that to be. But this, once again, is why we've got this narrative. What we're going through isn't new. It's the nature of nature, as I always like to say. It's the nature of nature. This is what happens during change, and this particular change is the biggest change that's ever happened since the first century, because we are saying that Christology is being reevaluated, reinterpreted, and finally seen not as a limited, particularistic religion that eventually divides into thousands of differing groups, but rather Christology was always intended to be something that pointed away from itself to that which is God identity, and God alone is identity. That's world-changing, because it means that you and I belong to the same global family as every person that walks the earth, whether they're conscious of that or not. That's a huge message. It's called post-Christian. That is a message that will bring you quickly, at this time in history, into isolation. But you know, that's just the beginning. You always have to have pioneers. You have to have first fruits. You have to have the less than 1% that begins each and every movement that's ever happened in history, and that's where we sit today. And it's okay. It's great, actually, to have this experience. A couple other things that I will mention here is the heartache that can come from this that Jesus addressed in Matthew 24. He said, when you go through this world-changing event, mother's going to turn against daughter and father against son. Most everyone I talk to for decades, I'm talking for decades, all these emotions I'm talking about, this is not just, hey, I've had a couple people bring these things up, I need to do a podcast. No, I've been talking to people for decades, and this is what they're saying. Inevitably, if you're one of the first to begin to look at things and have a different perspective about things, it can very much impact your family because we have identity on the line. This is a matter of survival. Instinct fights to survive and keep identity. And so this is no small matter. And so Jesus is just saying, you need to be prepared. This is what's going to happen. Mother's going to turn against daughter, father against son, meaning that you're going to endure some real heartache because you are loving your family. Families are a manifestation of love. Families are God created, God image, God's nature. And so you have these situations where you have families that split, and those splits can be, I talk to people who have literally lost relationships with parents or other family members to this day. And then there are other people that it's just a very uncomfortable situation, or it's one that's, it's okay if you just don't talk about it. And you guys who are in those positions, you know exactly what I mean. But there's also some amount of, or some level of heartache that goes with that. Because we all want to share the thing that's most important to us, and we want others that we love the most to be in that sharing. It's normal. It's normal to feel this heartache, and it's normal to feel the pain of someone thinking that you're going down the wrong path, or you're saying something negative about Jesus, or you're saying something negative about the Bible or God. It's normal to have that heartache when it's people in your own families. But this is what Jesus said. And I think there's a reason why he said, mother will turn against daughter, father against son. It's because the older generation, mother, father, are simply representatives of the current level that has brought that consciousness, that understanding, that meaning of how God identity is to operate as the status quo. It's the parents. They grew up with, they inherited, and it's just the way it is. And the reason they turn against daughter and son is because it's that new generation that represents a new way of thinking, a new level of thinking. And this is what happens. And it's alarming, and people are fearful. And a lot of the lashing out and a lot of the things that people get into heated discussions about, or even go so far as to lose relationship, are just simply because people are wanting to make sure they do the right things. So even if you have family members that don't understand, and they are acting in such a way that's very aggressive, or they're doing things in terms of cutting you off or saying things or whatever may be going on in your life, it's just simply because this is what they think is the right thing to do. I go back to Saul. How can you be going around seeing the people destroyed, people stoned to death, because you think it's the right thing to do? Same guy, different level of consciousness. He says, I'm the least worthy disciple. I'm the least of any person to be going around telling this message, because I was doing everything I could in the past to destroy it. People change. People can change. And so we stay where we are with our path. We stick to it. Even though, and the last thing I'll mention here as I close, even though we are experiencing a lot of not knowing, what's going to become of me? What's going to become of the way we have fellowship? We don't have enough groups today. There aren't people in my city. What about fellowship? I don't know how that's ever going to happen. Wow, how do we teach our kids now? What are the methods we use to teach our kids? It goes against our very instinct to know. And this, again, goes back to the genesis of creation, where the story uses Adam and Abraham in Genesis to talk about the genesis of consciousness. Part of us is instinctive like Adam, and Adam wants to know. He wants to grasp knowledge so he can be like God, which means that he knows he's got the answer. It's all provided. Everything is taken care of. I could drive on Sunday morning to a parking lot. I can go right in the building, and someone's already prepared a nice sermon. Somebody else has prepared all the music, and someone else is ready to teach my children, no matter what grade they're in, and maybe even for the teenagers to have youth events and everything else. It's all taken care of. I've got a handle on it. Then I go home. But remember, there's a reason why those things just did not provide the freedom you were looking for, because when you go to that building, suddenly, yeah, you had a sermon prepared, but some of the words of those sermons, you just couldn't go there anymore. And yeah, someone had prepared the music, but you were singing songs, and one day you were singing a song and you thought, I can't sing this song anymore. And on we go. Or your kids come home and they want to tell you something they learned in Bible class, and you're a little bit shocked because it has something to do with bad people, what happens to bad people. And you're realizing, well, this is what my kids are being taught. But you don't know what that needs to go to. You don't know how new formations are going to come. You're feeling isolated. You feel frustrated. All the things that we just talked about in this podcast, you're feeling. Because that is representative of the life conditions of a world-changing event. That's where we are. Now, I can tell you that Danae and I talk every day about a future that will provide ways for all of us to have more community, ways that we can see each other face to face, not just over a Zoom. Ways we could actually sit down and eat a meal together, hang out in the evenings, laugh, and talk about all these things and how they're affecting each one of us in our lives, and the excitement we feel about where we see things going as we move into the future. Those things will happen because the reason we are the first people to see what we are seeing is not because there's anything special about us. The President's message is the opposite. The President's message is we are, as human beings, all the same. God, children. That's it. No child better than another. All children loved. Some children behave well, some children not. We all have our days. And on we can go with that. But presence is not saying belong to this group. Presence isn't a group you belong to. Presence is a message that says the only group there is planetary family of God. That's it. And we're all in it. So there isn't exclusion anywhere here. So that's what we want to celebrate. That's what we want to get together and talk about, not because we get together and talk about those that are not in our circle. We can shake our head and say, what's going to become of this world? And those people, and those people, and those people. What we talk about is, how can I contribute to the well-being of others? How can I help someone else possibly get to experience and see the glorious freedom that comes with understanding you and all others are the children of God in a new creation, a new heaven and earth, and that as each individual wakes up to it, the new heaven and earth begins to manifest and bloom and expand and help us face the challenges that are in front of us as this planet tries to go forward. That's pretty exciting. And to know that someday there will be people sitting around in these meetings, and they will be talking maybe in every city, for all we know. And as surely as I sit here, I think someday, maybe X centuries from now, there are going to be people that are going to be there saying, man, what would it have been like to live back at the beginning of the third millennium, back in the early 2000s? What would that have been like? It was crazy back then. That the planet was going through all kinds of chaos. And yet you have these people that were proclaiming this God message. And it's what we all see today and how we got to where we are now in the year fill in the blank. That's what I see. That's what I believe the biblical nature has always had embedded within it, and that is the seed of spirit whose growth cannot be thwarted, stopped, and that will always produce tenfold, 100-fold, etc., etc. That's what I see in the glorious freedom, and I will tell you that sitting here, having been blessed with great support from so many of you out there whose support we are so grateful for. And it's been so needed and continues to be needed so we can continue to expand this message. I can tell you that the freedom I feel, that I don't have to worry about violating some confession of faith that makes me a true Christian versus not a true Christian or a heretic or whatever. This is a magnificent freedom, and it's not a freedom that allows me to be immoral, unethical, or encourages me that I can do whatever I want. That is a fundamentalist viewpoint. No, this is a freedom that allows me to grow infinitely. A freedom that allows me to experience deeper and deeper relationships and have a greater and greater appreciation for this beautiful world in which I live. That's pretty cool freedom. I like it. So I'm good today, not because every life condition I'm experiencing makes me want to clap my hands and say, goody, goody. I'm just like you. It depends what day it is as to what's going on in my world too. But no matter what it is, I keep bringing myself back to the narrative to think it through. To think it through. So that's all I'm trying to do in these podcasts on glorious freedom, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. And if you have comments, and some of you do, and you send them along, or questions, I will always try to incorporate them in perhaps other podcasts or answer you directly in email and so forth. So again, thank you very much for the time you've spent with me in this series, and I hope you are having a great week wherever you are on the planet today. I look forward to talking to you next time. See you then.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.